Today we have a special guest, something we haven't done before. We have somebody from the West Virginia DNR here. We have Rich Bailey, who is the state ornithologist for West Virginia, and we have lots of bird questions for Rich. So Rich, welcome.
Thank you.
And Rich is actually out here giving a talk this evening to the Potomac Valley Audubon Society. So we're kind of taking advantage of his proximity to pepper him with questions and what I'm sure is a very busy schedule this time of year. So Rich, welcome to NCTC. We're glad to have you here, and we appreciate you taking a little time out to do this distance broadcast. And the first question, Rich, is just to give us a little background on yourself.
So I have a pretty atypical path to where I am now, and I think a lot of people would say that about their careers.
Sure.
But I actually got my start in college as a musician, and I was a music major. And how I got to be an ornithologist is kind of a long path, but I switched in college to natural resource management, and after that I worked as a naturalist, an environmental educator in a seasonal job in Northern Virginia, and from there I really got engaged with kind of the on-the-ground nitty-gritty of nature study and working with kids and really teaching. And from there, I went on to grad school in Washington State and majored and did my thesis in public land management and environmental education. Following that, I came back east and did a stint in AmeriCorps in West Virginia, and that's where I found I really loved this state for many reasons. And so I was there for 2 years, and after that I went on to manage a park and nature center in Northern Virginia. And while I was there, and this was about 10 years ago, I really cultivated and developed a really deep interest in birds and bird conservation. I've always been a bird watcher. My mom got me hooked at a very early age, but working with the park authority I was a part of, both teaching about birds, but also doing on-the-ground habitat restoration projects and environmental policy consulting and stuff like that, I really became engaged with it. And so I was in that position for about 8 years or so, and then I finally came back to West Virginia to work for DNR.
Oh, welcome back.
Thank you.
It's a big state, and you nicely drove up all the way from Elkin, so we appreciate that. Hey, before we go into the birds, actually we do a lot of education outreach here. I'm intrigued by your thesis. What conclusions did you draw from?
So what I was studying with my thesis, and I kind of got an inkling of this when I was in undergraduate, but also working as a seasonal naturalist in an urban environment. I noted that when I was in the city, there was a very well-developed park system, and there was and there are quite a few nature centers in the DC metropolitan area, and those nature centers serve a very large number of school children and from school districts all around the area, obviously. And I noted that those nature centers served a function of satisfying SOL, standards of learning, and the teachers would bring the kids there and they would learn. And after I was there, I spent a lot of time out in rural environments. Well, I'm a backpacker, I'm a climber, and I got to thinking, what kind of access do children in a rural environment have to these types of environmental education resources? And that question kind of stuck with me on into grad school, and Washington State is a great opportunity to study that duality because on one hand you have the Seattle-Tacoma-Olympia corridor where you have a large population and a park system that's very similar to what we have in D.C. But in other areas of Washington State it's exceptionally rural, and there are not a lot of opportunities in a traditional sense for school kids and even high schoolers, college kids, and adults to have that kind of access. And so I studied, what they were doing in a rural environment versus a urban environment. What I found was that in a rural environment, it was actually very interesting in that the kids often had an even more powerful experience, because what the teachers were doing was partnering with local land agencies and federal land agencies, and the kids were actually more likely to be doing on-the-ground science as part of the learning experience. So rather than going to a nature center and having a program on say, wildflower identification or ecology or stuff like that, they were actually doing water quality monitoring. They were doing all kinds of interesting things. So.
We should get a copy of that thesis out here. Did you have any policy suggestions based on the thesis that you?
Yeah, after grad school, I came and worked at the park, and we actually incorporated that, and in some pretty interesting ways. Even though it was an urban environment, obviously, my park was a small park, 100 acres or so, but we had kind of a regenerating woodland, and we had a stream valley and stuff like that. And the stream was sadly very horribly impacted by a pesticide, an herbicide event at a nearby golf course that literally killed everything in the stream. And so what we did is we worked with kids to do water quality monitoring and macroinvertebrate surveys and stuff like that. So we were actually documenting the regeneration, restoration of life in the stream, and we were also documenting interesting events that compromise the health of the stream as well. Through what we did, we actually found that, for example, people were dumping their swimming pools into the storm drain of the stream, and literally causing similar catastrophic events. And we kind of figured that out through this type of activity that we were doing with the kids.
That's fascinating.
So,
no, we have 100 million terrestrial acres, so maybe we could try to do some more of that hands-on stuff. It's being done at some refuges. But it might be an interesting expansion.
Yeah.
Let's move up to the present. What does the state ornithologist do in West Virginia?
That's a really hard question to answer. Basically, my job and my focus are non-game birds in the state, and their conservation and management. And so what DNR does in a general sense is monitor and actually kind of do the science of monitoring wildlife in the state. And so I work on projects ranging from my main project right now, the State Breeding Bird Atlas, to monitoring specific bird populations. We've been monitoring bald eagle nests, for example, since the early 80s when we had a single bald eagle nest. Now we have well over 50 to 60 nests in the state. And so I'm out doing that. We have other we have a list of rare and threatened birds, state birds, and we actually monitor their populations. On top of that, I do a lot of commenting and interaction with development, particularly energy development. When a wind farm goes in, for example, they have to develop an avian and bat protection plan, and I comment on that. We meet with the folks that are putting those installations in, and we try to come to a good agreement on what we should do. I answer public inquiries. I give presentations across the state. So in other words, education and outreach is a component of the job. And so it's really all over the map.
You have a lot of stuff on your plate, it sounds like. So we really do appreciate the hour you're giving us.
Yeah, sure.
One of the first projects you mentioned was the Bird Atlas, and I think you've got some images to show us what you're doing with that.
Yeah. So if you look at this image right here, it's kind of a good cross-section of some of the birds we have in the state. And one of the things that I've always been struck by with West Virginia is just the diversity of both the topography, but also the types of habitats we have in the state. And as you might suspect, given the fact that the state is I believe, the second most forested in the nation, there are a lot of birds in the state, species-wise, that are in pretty big trouble other places, but are actually doing okay here in the state. So what I'm working on is the Breeding Bird Atlas, and it's the second atlas that we've done. The first one was in the 80s, and most states have completed at least one atlas at this point. And what it is, in a fundamental sense, is to document both the distribution of species in the state, but also get a measure of their relative abundance. How common is one bird species relative to another? And we do this every 20 years. And what it enables us to do is just track changes in bird populations, and those changes are both, again, in terms of distribution and abundance. And we are in year 4 out of 5, and we're really getting into the busy season, believe it or not, with Bird Atlas, even though it's a year-long effort, and I work on it year-long. May and June are really kind of extremely busy months for us as we go across the state. And we're already finding out some very interesting things relative to the last atlas, and some of it's good news. Take the bald eagle again, for example. We've seen a really big expansion of bald eagle numbers in the state. Some of it's not so good news, and there's a bird called a golden-winged warbler, for example, which is in significant decline across its range, or across most of its range, and that's no exception in West Virginia. And the reasons why it is declining is they're complex, ranging from things like habitat fragmentation, habitat loss, to parasitism by brown-headed cowbirds, to the most insidious reason, the fact that it's hybridizing with a closely related bird species called the blue-winged warbler. And so this atlas, we're noticing a significant decline, for example, and it's helping inform work that we're doing on the ground. There's a new initiative, Working Lands for Wildlife, and we're going to be working on habitat creation projects for golden-winged warbler. And the atlas has been kind of a critical component of helping decide where we want to do that kind of work.
Great. Help us interpret.
So if you look at this map here, it looks like a bunch of pixels, and that's really what it is. Each one of those squares is 1/6 of a USGS quadrangle map, okay, the standard topographic map. And you can see highlighted right here. It's about, each block is about 3.5 miles on a side or so. And what we're doing is we've then organized those blocks into priority and non-priority blocks, and we're systematically going to all of the priority blocks and documenting as many bird species as we possibly can in those blocks. And what it does over time is it generates a map, and it generates a map of where the birds are. And we actually did a study using geographic information systems to see, well, there's 6 blocks in a USGS quad. If we are only surveying one priority block per quad, is that block representative of the habitat as a whole in that quadrangle? And what we found is that in fact it is, which makes our job easier because, as you might suspect, it's a incredibly labor-intensive endeavor, and it requires volunteers and all kinds of other things like that. And so you can still provide data for non-priority blocks, and as you see, it obviously in this map there are plenty of blocks that look like they have, that are colored pixels basically, that have data. But our primary focus again are those priority blocks, because that's what enables us to then do the comparison between this atlas and the atlas that we did back in the 80s.
Is that how a priority block is determined? Is that it was surveyed in the 80s and you can do
right? Well, when they first set up the first atlas, they realized that the resources they had were not adequate to do all, it's like 2,700 blocks in the state. And so what they did is they took the 6th block out of every USGS quad, and it's generally the bottom right if you were to look at it, and that created a grid across the state. But then we realized that, well, some blocks that are not priority blocks are also really important critical habitat for certain species in the state. Canaan Valley National Wildlife Refuge is a great example of that. So they went through and looked at non-priority blocks that were also really obviously had species and habitat that we were interested in, and they added those as priority blocks as well. So it's not exclusively what we call 6 blocks, but overwhelmingly it is.
Okay. And the southwestern part, has that just not been surveyed yet?
So exactly. What you notice is there's a big hole down in the southwestern part of the state, and it's no coincidence that that's right, I think. It's really one of the most inaccessible parts of the state, and both in terms of a general lack of public land, which provides easy access for atlasers, but also it takes a long time to get there, and there's very intensive coal mining, for example, that goes on down there. And so this year we are doing a concerted effort to get that region covered, and we have atlasers that are going down. So in essence, when you look at this map, the white gaps are basically the areas where there's no data and the areas we still have yet to cover. And we're hoping to make significant headway this year, but again, we've got another year after this to work and try to get it done. So
you mentioned atlasers. What exactly do they do?
So there's 2 things that you do when you're atlasing. Okay, and we kind of separate out. And if you look at these 2 things up here, we're again we're doing distribution and we're doing relative abundance. Okay, so in terms of distribution, you're just looking at presence, absence. And so an atlaser is going to a block during what we call safe dates. And those safe dates is a date range where we can reasonably expect that the birds we see are there breeding. They're not, we've ruled out that they could be there just migrating through. And so they're going to the blocks during a bird safe date, a species safe date. And in general, June is the month where you're getting almost all of the birds within their safe dates. And so we're very busy. But what they do for the presence absence is really they're going to the different, basically trying to cover as much of the block as possible through driving, hiking, whatever access they can get. And they're documenting all the birds that they see, all the different species that they see. So in other words, if I'm in a block and I see a Carolina chickadee, you know, I'm looking at the behavior of that bird, and there are different codes that tell me what's the likelihood that this bird is breeding. And it ranges from I'm just seeing the bird to I'm seeing a bird feeding, you know, fledged young, for example. It's obvious that the bird had successful breeding. And so they're putting those codes in. They're getting to as much different habitat in the block as possible. And in general, that will pretty quickly, if the weather is good, give you a nice long list of birds. And that'll give you the presence absence. That'll color the pixel, and it'll say, okay, we saw the bird. And the darker the pixel on the map, the more in this case, the more observations there are. But if you were to go and take a look at a map of a particular species, the darker pixel would mean increased likelihood that it was breeding. But in addition to that, we're also needing to document a relative abundance. Right. And so the first atlas, we did not do that. So this is the first atlas that we're doing that. And so statewide coverage is incredibly important. And it's a little bit more of a complicated step to do that. And so staff involvement has been overwhelming the way that we've gotten that data, but also we do have volunteer help with it. But what it involves is actually setting up what we call point count stations, point count surveys at 5 points in a given block. And those 5 points should basically reflect the habitat diversity in that block. And so if you're in a block and you say there's a farm field, you set a point there. You've got interior forest habitat, you've got wetland. So you try to set the points accordingly. And what they're doing is it's a 10-minute point count protocol where they're actually not just documenting what birds. In most cases, you're actually hearing. Atlasers need to be able to really know their birds by ear, but how many are there? And through that, you can get a sense of both within the block what's the relative abundance, but you can start to tease out a statewide or region-wide or county or however you want to divide it up. You know what the.
Sounds pretty complicated. How do the atlasers get their expertise in the bird songs and so on?
Well, basically, there's a good base in West Virginia of birders. You know, people that just love birds and they love to bird watch, and it's kind of a growing pastime in America. And so we have basically a good base to work from, and we really court these volunteers, and that's really important to what I do when I'm going out and teaching and I'm presenting to various bird clubs. And for example, you know, I'm talking about the atlas. I'm saying we need this help, and I was out in the field. You can really pick up those birds. You know, what do you think about helping us out? And most of the time they're incredibly enthusiastic about actually not just birding, but actually furthering the science of what we know about birds in the state. And you know, through that. And through staff involvement, we have a good base of folks that are helping us out.
Well, what have you found out so far from your bird atlas?
Well, we found out two things, and I'll use two examples here. There are two groups of birds that are in general decline. Both, I think you can make a case across the board in the eastern United States, but also in West Virginia. And those two groups, the first one here is for example, grassland-successional habitat birds, and these range from species like the eastern meadowlark to a bird that's I'm particularly fond of, the loggerhead shrike, to a successional species that uses ephemeral or created habitat called the golden-winged warbler, which I mentioned earlier. And what you see here on the screen is basically the current distribution of golden-winged warbler that we've found in the state. And obviously, since the atlas is still ongoing, it's not a complete map. But you can see the red pixels here are all blocks that we've picked up the golden-winged warbler, and all the blue pixels here are where the blue-winged warbler is. And you can kind of see there's a dividing line there, and we start to see, well, the golden-winged warbler is still present in these counties, and more than that, it's generally present above a certain elevation, and you know, that we start to think about, you know, what's the difference, you know, and where can we manage for habitat to make sure we just have golden-winged warblers, because a huge problem is hybridization. Right. But again, if you look at the map up here, this is the golden-winged warbler coverage from 1989. And you can see there's just a drastic difference there, particularly down here in the coal fields of the state. These reclaimed mine sites have a lot of what you would think would be great habitat for these birds. And golden-winged warblers are still down there. We've actually just recently added data from this area for golden-winged warbler, but in general, they're declining. And it's not just because of the blue-winged warbler. We think it's also a general decline in the quality and abundance of the habitat that they need as well. We're taking a look at these grassland birds, and it's helping us kind of note where do we still have them and what can we do. We start thinking about what we can do to maintain them into the future.
The hybridization is interesting. Before
Yes,
we leave this,
yes.
I mean, we think about a lot with mammals, wolves, bears, and so
Yes.
on. Is it common in birds to have this hybridization issue?
It can be common, yes, and as you might suspect, it's much more common between very closely related bird species, and these are birds that are within the same genus, for example. Golden-winged warbler and blue-winged warbler are extremely closely related, and phylogenetic analysis shows this.
Right.
And they're so close together, genetically speaking, as a matter of fact, that they really readily hybridize with each other. It's not just, as an accident here and there, but where there's a contact zone, they actually will readily reproduce and create hybrids. And what we found is over time, and what the science is saying is roughly over a period of 50 years, if there's a contact area between blue wing and golden wing, over a course of 50 years, for whatever reason, the blue wing warbler will replace the golden wing warbler. And so what we're seeing in the state is that line has been moving east. And basically what it means is the golden wing warbler is appearing to kind of getting squeezed out in a way.
And what eliminated the breeding barrier that used to exist between them?
That's a good question that we also are uncertain of. We know that the blue-winged warbler has been expanding its range. There are any number of theories about it, ranging from climate change to changes in the landscape caused by anthropogenic causes, basically. But there is no definitive answer as to why, as far as I know, as to why the blue-winged warbler has been expanding. Just that it has, and as it has expanded and moved to cooler environments, because the golden-winged warbler generally has favored slightly wetter but also cooler habitats. As the blue-winged warbler has moved in, the golden-winged warbler is just getting squeezed out.
I'm going to ask you one last question, because some of the audience won't be conservation biologists,
Sure.
and they might be wondering, why are hybrids a problem? We still have birds.
Right, you still have birds, but basically what the hybrids are a problem. Well, it's not that the hybrids themselves are a problem, they're kind of a symptom of the problem. And the hybrids are fully fertile, and in some cases at least, hybrids are not fertile, but the hybrids of blue-winged and golden warblers are, and they'll migrate south to Central America, because this is a neotropical migrant, and they'll come back, and those hybrids will in turn interbreed with blue-winged warblers and golden-winged warblers. And so we're just trying to figure out what the process is, but basically over time there's at least a phenotypic shift from basically towards blue-winged warblers, and over time blue-winged warblers completely replace.
Okay.
So
thanks.
Yeah. So if you move to another group of birds that we have a general concern about, these are interior forest birds, okay? And interior forest birds are particularly susceptible to habitat fragmentation. And this is basically the continued and progressive reduction in forest patch size. And there's some places in West Virginia that have very, very large intact forests. If you look at, for example, Monongahela National Forest in the Cranberry Wilderness area, you've got a 50,000 acre wilderness that's roadless and is contiguous forest. But in large areas of the state, even though the state is overwhelmingly still forested, those forest patches are smaller. And what that means is not only is there a reduction in quality of habitat for these interior bird species, there's also a drastic increase in what we call edge habitat and the edge effect. And when that happens, it opens the birds up to increased predation, for example, but also to increased parasitism by the brown-headed cowbird, which is kind of noted as a big problem these days. And the bird I have up here is called a Cerulean Warbler, and this is a bird that's in drastic decline range-wide since the 1960s. It's had a very significant drop in its population. And in large areas of its range, it's simply either disappeared or the abundance has dropped drastically. One of the things about West Virginia that's kind of great, but also very important to what we do and what we're studying, is that West Virginia is quite possibly going to be one of the last real strongholds for this species. And the Cerulean Warbler requires large intact patches of forest, but not only that, it tends to like forest with kind of old growth characteristics, which might mean canopy breaks, for example, where the bird likes to sally out and catch bugs and stuff like that. And you know, there's still large parts of the state, as you might suspect. It's very rugged, where this is actually the most common warbler in some places still. But it's still declining nonetheless. Abundance seems to be dropping, and so we're increasingly interested in you know, areas where we still really have high abundances of the species. And there are other birds as well. The wood thrush is one that folks might be more familiar with. The wood thrush is declining range-wide as well, and we're interested through this atlas to figure out what's going on with that species and what effect forest fragmentation is having as well.
I notice where we live in the eastern panhandle, it's not a stronghold for the Cerulean Warbler.
No, and it's interesting. If you look at this map, it's really west of the Allegheny front, and in the Ohio Hills region, but also, you know, Allegheny Plateau region, and then down into the southwest part of the state. And again, you see a gap here. That's not because there are no Cerulean Warblers there, it's that we haven't gotten there yet. But you know, it really will start to leap out how important this part of the state is, for example. But we do have Cerulean Warblers in the eastern panhandle. It's just in specific places like Sleepy Creek Wildlife Management Area, for example, has Cerulean Warblers.
Great.
So.
Do you have any more for the bird atlas?
That's it for the bird atlas, yeah.
So you're going to finish this in a year, and this is monitoring what's out there. Then do you take remediation measures?
Well, yes. The short answer is yes, and golden-winged warbler is a good example of that. Through the Working Lands for Wildlife initiative that's kind of in progress right now. The NRCS is leading the charge, so to speak, but we're working closely with them. And what is working with private landowners, private small landowners, to manage for golden-winged warblers specifically. And what this data is giving us is the ability to say, okay, these are the counties that we really want to focus in. It's very obvious, even though, for example, we have golden-winged warblers down here, we have golden-winged warblers up here, it's really kind of in the midst of the contact zone, and it seems like no matter what we do, it might be too late, so to speak. But are there areas like here, for example, in Pocahontas County, Greenbrier County, are there places where we still overwhelmingly have golden-winged warblers, and can we boost their populations in those regions? And so the atlas in this case is directly informing on-the-ground management that we're doing. In the case of the Cerulean Warbler, it's another good example. Folks at WVU are doing a lot of work on looking at, and I think they just finished a project on this, looking at, well, is there a way that we can manage for Cerulean Warblers in the forested landscape and still allow people that are doing forest management on their property to generate an income, basically? And the answer we found is very much yes, if we do it right. And so DNR, you know, plays a role in helping out with that.
What are some suggestions you make so they can still manage the landscape but not adversely affect the warblers?
So one of the things we found is because the Cerulean Warbler really likes to have those little canopy breaks to sally out on. If you kind of do a intermediate level of thinning, is the easiest way to put it, in a given stand, you can actually boost their numbers significantly. And there are different treatments and different ways of going about it. But what we found is it's not a lot of extra work to create habitat that could be very good at boosting Cerulean Warbler numbers. So.
What about private landowners with the
golden-winged warbler?
Golden-winged warbler.
So what the Working Lands for Wildlife is basically, you know, a farmer or forestry. It's not necessarily in their economic interest to manage for golden-winged warblers, and so what the initiative is doing is actually helping them out financially in doing management on their properties for golden-winged warblers.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the other species you work with. One that's of interest to us is having one of the 50 bald eagle nests.
Yeah.
Tell us a little, first of all, why were the bald eagle numbers so low in the 1980s, and why have they come back so robustly?
It's interesting in that new generations of Americans might not be as aware as those that were kind of born and lived through the 50s and 60s, for example, but the bald eagle was very significantly impacted by a pesticide called DDT, and a lot of other raptors were as well, and it led to shell thinning and basically nesting success for the species dropped drastically. And so what that meant is the eagles went through this precipitous decline, and they actually were listed as an endangered species. And beginning in the early 80s, we discovered and we noted that there was a pair of eagles actively nesting in the eastern panhandle region. And this was kind of the first part of the state where they actively kind of resettled. And so even now, most of the eagle nests that we monitor, that we know about, are here in the eastern panhandle region. And that's Jefferson, Berkeley counties, obviously, but also Hardy and Grant and Pendleton counties. And for example, if you look at Pendleton County, there's a Shenandoah Mountain kind of runs along the eastern edge of the county, and George Washington National Forest is there. And there are a number of flood control impoundments, dams and water impoundments kind of along the base of the mountain in West Virginia, and we're finding that eagles are nesting kind of at those impoundments, those little bodies of water. But they're also starting to nest increasingly along the Ohio River. There's a new nest now along the Greenbrier River in Pocahontas County, and it's only a matter of time, really. You're kind of noting they're just filtering out along these waterways and other lakes and stuff like that.
Great. And those of you in the audience, you've been looking at our 8-week-old eaglets this year, and they seem to be doing very well. They're growing quickly. How do you monitor the eagle nest? You just
Well, what we do is we have known nest locations, and we rely on actually locals giving us a call and saying, "Hey, I've got eagles nesting on my property." This is kind of the main way that we discover eagle nests. And so what we do is once we know there's a nest, we'll generally try to visit 3 times during the breeding season. That first time, kind of when they're first getting started, generally in February, and we'll do 2 other visits after that, just to document the breeding success. In other words, they've started nesting as pairs. This nest has been active for X number of years. They're back on the nest. Great. Looks like the female's on eggs. We'll wait. We'll come back. Oh, look, there's nestlings in the nest now. How many are there? And then we'll come back in June and we'll take a look. In this case, have they or are they fledging and about ready to leave the nest, et cetera. And this is actually probably the last year that we're going to be doing that, because
they come back so well.
Exactly. This is kind of it's starting to get a point where there's so many eagle nests. Can we monitor them all? Should we monitor them all, given the fact that the species is doing so well? And so this is probably the last year that we're going to be doing it on a yearly basis. There are other, for example, golden eagles is something that's really interesting, because we're finding that golden eagles winter in large numbers in West Virginia, and the habitat we have in the state is actually very important for wintering populations, the eastern golden eagle. So,
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Now, last year we had, let me ask you this, take advantage of your expertise here. Last year we had a male, either drive off or kill, we're not sure which, the male that had been at the nest for 5 or 6 years. Is that common eagle behavior? Have you guys seen that in the other nests?
I can't say that it's common, and I'm not aware of it being documented in any of the other nests. But then again, my caveat is I've only been on the job for a year, so I'd have to ask my previous who's actually been monitoring for 10 years. But looking back, it's definitely not a common occurrence, but as you guys noted, it is known to happen, and it can happen.
And the way you describe the nests coming into West Virginia, are they basically just following the rivers? Are they migrating in along the Potomac and the Ohio and that?
It seems, in terms of where the nest distribution is, it seems to be following loosely, in a general sense, that kind of pattern. That they're moving up and down the waterways in Hardy and Grant County and Eastern Panhandle. That it's the Potomac River runs through there, the different forks of the Potomac River. But also there are lakes and impoundments in the area that really are kind of attractive to them. And so in a loose sense, they're generally spreading out along waterways. But also we have a lot of lakes in the state, dammed up lakes, and they're kind of starting, I think, to settle. And I think in another 10 years, 20 years, we'll start seeing more and more eagles on these lakes.
Great. Are there any current threats to the eagle? Are they good to
Well,
go?
one of the things that kind of really bugs us at the DNR, and it's not a huge threat, is believe it or not, there's quite a bit, or not quite a bit, but there's eagle poaching that goes on in the state, and it's always a concern when that happens. I have to think to myself, who would shoot an eagle?
Right.
Who would actually do that? But it's something that we take seriously and that we follow up on with Fish and Wildlife Service, and really the way to mitigate that is landowner education and outreach. Just talking to folks and letting them know, hey, this is there's no reason for you to need to shoot a bird of prey like this.
Why are poachers shooting eagles? Do we know? I mean, do we have any? Because it's a perennial question we ask. Well, why would you shoot an eagle?
It's sad for me to say this, but really what I've come to think is that some people just see a target, and they shoot, and it's as simple as that. Obviously, I think there's an occasional case of farmers feeling like there's concern about their livestock or whatever else animals they have, but that's the only other reason that I could possibly think of to shoot the country's national bird.
Well, you're the West Virginia State Ornithologist, and we have some fairly unique conditions in West Virginia that impact birds, and you alluded to them earlier. One of the things is I think we have fairly significant wind energy farms out here.
We do, and wind energy is new to the state, recently new, and we know that it's going to continue, and there's a lot of wind energy potential in particularly along the Allegheny front, and we know that these wind energy installations are going to come in, and they're going to feed into the local power supply and the national power supply, and really from our perspective, there's not anything inherently wrong with that. What the concern that some people have had is, well, what's the effect of wind turbines on migrating birds, for example? And what the data is showing that the wind turbines themselves do not cause, not at all cause a large degree of bird mortality.
Really?
What does cause bird mortality is lighting done in the wrong way, lighting on towers, and you can think of a wind turbine as a tower. Lighting on the tower can be a problem, and we started to discover this early on in these huge bird kills on television communication towers. Some of these towers are 1,000 feet tall, and they have guy wires, and what we found over time is that there are certain conditions, particularly in the fall, that can be really dangerous for migrating birds. Birds use different orientation cues or different navigation cues when they're migrating, and when there's bad weather out, and when all of a sudden you lose visibility, say there's fog or weather, a significant rain or weather event, and birds find themselves in the air, they lose a lot of those cues. Okay, and so when they're flying blind, so to speak, in certain ways, they come across, say, a tower that has steady burning lights, either red or white. We found there's data that says that one might be worse than the other, but generally speaking, my understanding is steady burning lights. What happens is the birds are literally trapped by that light, and I say trapped rather than attracted, because they're seeing that light as a navigational cue. And during clear conditions, say you've got perfect weather, and most songbirds migrate at night, believe it or not, and so that's why I'm saying lights. And so say you've got perfect conditions when the bird is flying, or if you're in an airplane, you can see this. The ground below you appears dark, and the sky above you appears to be lighter. Okay, and so the theory is that this helps the bird navigate toward or orient towards the horizon and have a good horizon line. And if a bird, however, is migrating or flying at night in bad low visibility conditions, and they encounter a structure, it could even be a ground structure. There was a bird kill at a local high school in Tucker County. It's not a big tower, but it was in the right weather conditions, and it was on top of a mountain. What happens is that gets inverted. So in other words, all of a sudden it becomes lighter below and darker above because of the light scattering in the fog or whatever. And all of a sudden the bird literally gets turned upside down and starts flying, can fly and actually get trapped, and they'll end up circling these structures. And if the structure has guy wires, for example, or anything else, they'll either die from exhaustion or they'll die from impact. And mortality events can be huge. There's a case in Kansas, I believe, where 5,000 to 10,000 birds were killed in a single night at a single structure.
Wow.
And so, really, the point of this is that a lot of mitigation can be done by simply making sure that your lighting, even though it follows FAA guidelines, follows certain protocol, and that protocol is blinking lights are important. You know, blinking lights seem to mitigate in a large way these mortality events. But accidents can and do occur, such as what happened at the high school. We had a recent accident that happened at one of our wind farms in West Virginia. But again, it wasn't the turbines themselves that caused the mortality. It was the lighting issue, and it wasn't actually the lighting on the turbines. It was the lighting on the substation. So it wasn't even, you know. So it's you might get the point that it's a complicated issue.
Yeah. But blinking doesn't attract them.
Well, it seems to not
trap them.
It seems to not trap them. And there's a really kind of an interesting and kind of sad image after 9/11. Of course, there's a 9/11 memorial, and what they did with the memorial is they shone these floodlights straight up into the sky to mimic, you know, or to kind of, you know, remember the towers.
Right.
And there were a number of images shot of literally thousands of migrating birds trapped in those lights over New York City at night in 9/11 in September. It's right in the middle of fall migration, and so you could see these just clouds of birds just circling in these lights. And so it really is, and it can be a big issue and a big concern. And so what we do is say, well, you know, we know when facilities are going in, and you know, and we support that, but at the same time, we need to work with you to you know, do the things that can pretty easily mitigate bird mortality.
That's fascinating. When I was an undergraduate and studying biology,
Yeah.
for ornithology to count the birds in the Twin Cities where I was going to school, we would go to the base of the IDS tower and see what dead birds lay there.
Yeah.
And I guess back then in the 80s, we just assumed they'd flown into the skyscraper and not seen it, but it might have been the lights that actually.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because even though literally the low estimate is 5 million birds a year die from tower collisions of some kind or another. But if you compare that, say, to window impacts or feral cat predation, it's just dwarfed.
Really?
So say the estimate for wind turbine impacts, bird flying directly in a wind turbine, is 500,000 birds a year, right? And then, you know, tower impact is say 5 million, upwards of 5 million. If you compare that to predation and window impacts, literally hundreds of millions of birds are being struck down by that. And so basically what the birds are seeing is a reflective surface, and so to them it's just a continuation of their field of vision, and they fly and they impact directly into the windows. And the American Bird Conservancy, for example, just released a really nice guideline booklet, basically how you can minimize and basically screen your windows so that you minimize those impacts. So, you know, if you look at a slice of the pie, the overwhelming pie slice of bird mortality would be that stuff rather than turbine or tower.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
What about feral cats? Can we do anything about that? Is that a huge impact in West Virginia, or?
The short answer is yes, but it depends on the demography of the human populations, right? Feral cats are usually associated with people, so as you might suspect, certain regions, certain areas, particularly in urbanized suburban areas, feral cats have a much greater impact than they do, say, in intact forest patches in the state. There are cats on farmland, you know, farmland type habitat, and so there's predation there. But it's kind of if you think of pollution, of point source versus non-point source pollution, cat predation is kind of non-point source pollution. It's kind of you know, common. It's kind of a prevalent overall reduction in bird populations. I would say compared to other states, West Virginia suffers from it less, simply because West Virginia is a more rural state with more wildland habitat or other types of habitat.
Okay. The other thing we're known for in West Virginia is coal.
Yes.
We don't have it here in the Panhandle, but what is the impact of coal mining on bird populations?
Mountaintop removal mining in the southwest part of the state, again, is something that's really important to the economic livelihood of much of the state,
Right.
and it's something again that we know is going on, is going to continue to go on, and but what it does cause is habitat fragmentation, and what it does is it can reduce forest patch size, which then directly correlates to loss of habitat for interior forest birds, and so. Working through the atlas, for example, and I'm interested in seeing what's the difference in distribution, with ongoing coal mining, and what are ways that we can mitigate it. Are there areas within the coal mining landscape that are not going to be mined, and can we really work to improve habitat there so that the coal mines can continue to operate, but we can continue to really boost in quality habitat for these interior forest birds. And so it's kind of again a complex issue, and it just depends on where you are in the state. But in general, we look at it in terms of forest fragmentation for these species. On the plus side, reclaimed mine sites could potentially be a boon for grassland bird species. So you can look at it that way as well. Some of these reclaimed mine sites have golden-winged warblers, for example. We've noted a bird called grasshopper sparrows on some reclaimed mine sites. But it's a complex issue because reclaimed mine sites need to have not just if you were at a reclaimed mine site and you're looking at it, ostensibly it looks like a grassland,
right.
But that's not necessarily as important as what type of grass is growing, what types of bugs, what's the bug biomass that's getting produced, what kind of forage and food. It might actually be that the birds arrive and try to nest, but find that they simply don't have the food resources to nest successfully. But on the other hand, it might be, well, no, it actually is good, and they're nesting very successfully down there. And again, with the atlas, it's an access challenge. How do we get onto these mine sites, these reclaimed sites, to document this? And that's one of the things we're working on. So
it's a very thoughtful answer. I think we're lucky to have you as our state ornithologist thinking about this deeply. Let me move to a less critical issue.
Sure.
We get 10 to 15,000 students through here every year,
sure.
and most of them are not from West Virginia.
Sure.
Where do we fit on the Atlantic Flyway and here in the Panhandle, and what are some of the more interesting bird things they might see if they came from the West or Alaska? They come from all over the
wonderful
country.
thing about West Virginia is because of the topography, we have a very wide range of habitats, and that ranges from lowland, lush, deciduous forest along the Ohio River to farmland and lake habitats to the red spruce forest and red spruce habitat on top of the mountains in the Alleghenies. And depending on where you are, you're going to have a whole different complement of bird species to look at. And when you think about, at least my sense of this is when you think about flyways, we tend to like to think about bird flyways as there's a specific line where the birds are going, and then outside that flyway they're not,
yeah.
and it's not quite as cut and dry as that. But in a general sense, there are large numbers of migrating birds that follow the Allegheny front, and we have different bird banding stations in the state, and one in particular is called the Allegheny Front Migration Observatory, and it's actually not too far away from here. It's up on near Dolly Sods Wilderness area, and so what they found many years ago is that they're just huge. Gosh, they're huge numbers of birds, kind of filtering through this area, heading south, and they band in the fall, and I've gone there and spent some time with them, and again, it's just a major corridor for birds heading south, and so they're banding the birds, they're noting, and over time, year by year as they band, the idea is that not only can we track what's the trend line in the numbers of particular species that are coming through, but also when you band a bird, you hope that eventually it'll be recovered, and we'll be able to kind of document, well, where has this bird been, and so banding recovery rates, as you might suspect, are very low, but every time it happens, it really helps to inform us about this stuff.
That's great. So we are an important.
Yes, the short answer, West Virginia is important in many ways for bird life, not only because it's some of the best remaining habitat for certain species, but also we're blessed with lots of mountains, and in particular the Allegheny Front, flyway there, as you put it. So
you mentioned earlier a part of your job is speaking to the public, and probably youths in addition to adults and so on. I'm curious about the youth end, because we're trying to get into that more and more in our agency. What message do you give young people when you're talking about birds? What do you hope they take back? They're not going to become birders after an hour with you, although that'd be great.
They're not, and what I try to get across is what I said in my previous job is you don't need to go on vacation, you don't need to travel a long distance to really find amazing things. And a lot of folks in West Virginia have the benefit of not living in the city, even though there's wonderful things to observe in the city. They live on farms, they live in the woods, and there's just such abundance just right at home. And not only that, but this idea that it's just totally inaccessible because there's so much to learn, there's so much to know. And what I always tell them is I don't know squat. And I truly feel that. Nature study in general is one of those things. The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know much at all. Right. And the questions that we're trying to answer, and we're interested in the state with birds, is a great example of that. I'm learning new stuff every day, and that in and of itself is the beauty of it. Is the discovery and the and really through that, the motivation to do stuff to help birds. And so I've been trying to involve, for example, Boy Scouts to help us do night bird surveys. For example, we have a bird in the state that used to be and still is in West Virginia, a lot of places, a very common, wonderful sound in the evening, the whippoorwill. Yep. And but again, we need to survey for the whippoorwill, and there's certain times of the day when you're likely to hear them, and other times when you're not. And so trying to get kids engaged, as a scouting activity, to go drive in your car with your window rolled down, and listen for whippoorwills, and let me know, but again, it's kind of that concept of stepping beyond just kind of the classroom or facility-based learning to actually furthering the science, and through that, having a very powerful learning experience. Well, and so great. Any opportunity that, we have to do that is very important. And, in DNR, I play that role, but we also have a dedicated staff person that does education outreach and does a wonderful job at it.
That's great. We're just about out of time. This has been one of the fastest hours we've had. So that's a tribute to you, Rich. It's been great. And birds are charismatic.
They are, yes.
A lot of naturalists come in through birds, and your enthusiasm for the subject is evident. So I think an obvious last question is, what keeps you passionate about birds? Do you like to go out and watch certain birds or go to certain parts of the state that,
I do. I think a lot of folks get started with bird watching just because they become quickly aware, they're not only they're just beautiful, fascinating animals, right, but the bird diversity is large in this country, let alone going down to some place like Costa Rica that has, right, so many more birds. But they're highly mobile. Different birds, really like particular habitats, and so through birds, you start to learn about everything else, and that's one of the things that I really value, is that it's not only, when we do work to conserve a bird species, we're not only helping the bird out, the type of habitat that we're helping to protect or we're managing for through forestry activities or whatever else, we're actually protecting and creating a certain type of habitat that will benefit any other range of species, from plants to animals. And so it's kind of through this field of study, you're doing more. You're having the opportunity to make an impact beyond just your initial immediate target.
And it's fun.
And it's fun.
That's one of the keys
absolutely.
we sometimes forget. Yeah. Rich, this has been wonderful. I really want to thank you for coming to NCTC. We hope to get you out
My pleasure,
again.
yeah.
I was very disappointed to hear the eagle nest surveys might slow down, because I think that would be an opportunity to trap you again.
Well, again, we're transitioning to golden eagles, though.
All right.
We've been working on that. It's an interest, but it's an interesting question. But hey, I can't complain, because it's a real success story.
Yes,
and that's always a nice thing.
Well, Rich, thank you very much.
Sure
We've been
thing.
talking to Rich Bailey, who is the West Virginia DNR state ornithologist, and has given us a lot to think about issues affecting ornithology and the birds in this state and across the country, really. So thank you, Rich. Thank you for tuning in, and appreciate your time.